Convicted murderer Oscar Pistorius has been denied parole. The Correctional Services Parole Board refused Pistorius parole on the basis that he had not served a minimum detention period. The disgraced Paralympian appeared before the board wanting to be set free 10 years after shooting and killing his then-girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp in 2013.
Well, it seems the parole hearing for Oscar Pistorius should never have gone ahead to begin with. What we understand now is that the clarification order from the Supreme Court of Appeal indicating that Pistorius had not yet completed the minimum detention period was sent to the Department of Correctional Services on March the 28th, but it's unclear when the parole board received it. Was it failure then to communicate timeously to avoid all of this then? Because somewhat, this information you say you received on the 28th
of... only made available to us today.
Only made, so somewhere along the line, the communication certainly could have arrived earlier to avoid, the victim's family, Mr. Nxumalo, from going through this kind of pain.
I think it's something that one can always just say, when was it issued and when was it delivered to us? I think technically, and I wouldn't want to go around circles around that, because what matters is that we've got a clarification order and the parole board has made this decision based on it.
At least one legal expert says it's bizarre that the information was seemingly not communicated timeously.
It's quite bizarre that the parole hearing proceeded today, given the fact that Pistorius has not met the minimum requirement to bring the application. In other words, he has not served enough of his prison sentence to become eligible for parole. Certainly a big setback, I think, for him, but for all parties involved, as there was a certain level of finalization expected from today.
The Steenkamp family has, however, welcomed the decision to deny their daughter's killer parole.
June was with me when I received the call. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to reach Barry, and the press already had hold of the story.
Earlier, before entering the parole hearing, June Steenkamp was clear that the family believed Oscar Pistorius was not remorseful and should not be set free. How is it for you as a family?
It's going to be very hard to be in the same room as him.
And of course you'll be opposing any parole that you as a family believe that you've not healed.
Story. I don't believe his story. I don't.
And how is Barry doing? We know he's not here today.
Well, he can't walk anymore, and he's turning 80 now. So, he's very stressed about this.
Pistorius will now only be considered for parole in August 2024. Griselda Lewis, SABC News in Attridgeville.
Meanwhile, the Pistorius family lawyer says that they're exploring legal options regarding the decision. Well, for a little bit more on this, we're now joined by the CEO of the Soul City Institute, Phinah Kodisang. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. I just wonder what your thoughts are about Oscar Pistorius being denied parole when you start to think about gender-based violence.
Thank you, Peter, and good evening to everyone. I think, the sad reality in South Africa is that the victims are the ones that never win in anything relating to gender-based violence and femicide. It is a complex societal issue. It requires that our laws are always reviewed. And we know that, the laws will not favor everyone. And that's the sad thing, because parole is a privilege. It's not a human right. It is a privilege. And when we choose to give it to the perpetrators, we don't consider the victims, the survivors, and the pain and the trauma that they go through each and every time when we give the perpetrators their lives back, when our loved ones, the loved ones that have been lost, we cannot gain them back. So I think that's just the emotion it evokes. It evokes emotions of sadness, and that, it's just a sort of a lost battle when you look at how even the lawyers are pushing to get him out without any consideration for the family and the pain that they are feeling, and you wonder what is like the minimum that we can afford victims and survivors so that they get the satisfaction that, you know, something has been done to heal, to help them heal and to help them find closure. So I really feel for the Steenkamp family, I feel that, you know, 2024 is around the corner, so they'll still go through this pain again in August 2024. So we cannot even celebrate this moment, you know, because we know that 2024 is around the corner. So we'll go through this again where they'll be in the courts and Oscar might even at that time go free.
All right. I mean, I don't want to use this word, but do you think that this, for the time being at least, is a victory for the fight against gender-based violence?
The longer the perpetrators stay in prison, of course, it's a victory. Small victories that we need to celebrate, you know, because the intention should be clear in our country around gender-based violence and femicide. The laws must be stricter, and I remember Minister Lamula had committed that, you know, even around parole, they'll apply stricter rules to ensure that at least the minimum is set before a person is considered for parole. So when we see that, you know, they are keeping true to their words, we really appreciate and we want to encourage that we continue tightening and strengthening our laws and policies so that we afford survivors of GBVF and victims of GBVF some justice, because there's a lack of justice in our country around GBVF.
All right, talking about then this lack of justice, what is your stance and hope going forward in terms of the granting of parole of people who have been convicted of gender-based violence crimes?
So let's start here. There was a study done by the MRC, I think it was 2020, if not 2021, where they indicated that around 150 cases of GBV are reported daily, even more, right? But of those that are reported, 30 make it to the courts. And only 10 or even less of the cases that make it to court end up in a sentencing. So looking at that, we are seeing a failure in the system to really do justice. And so when we have managed, you know, with a few, the 1 to 10 cases to prosecute and put people behind bars, I think we need to tighten that so that we don't lose hope in the justice system. And my feeling about parole, as I indicated, it is a privilege. So we need to navigate it very carefully when we afford people that privilege, knowing that they have denied someone a right to continue living. So when we want to balance the scales, as much as a democracy requires of us to look at both sides, you know, afford even the perpetrator rights, we must know that a parole is not a right, it's a privilege. So we need to apply stricter rules around it so that it doesn't then get abused and it doesn't then become a getaway, how perpetrators end up getting away with, you know, murder and with violation of women, which is a serious problem in our country. So I'm asking that stricter parole rules be applied, and we can always relook at them because the gaps exist and we need to tighten those to avoid, you know, at 6 years. I remember 6 years into the sentence, Oscar had already appealed. Now again, even before he finishes the maximum, you know, requirements, he's still appealing. So we need to tighten that. It's a bit loose, and we need to make sure that we don't afford perpetrators such privileges. At least serve the minimum before we can even consider talking about letting you go.
All right, I was about to ask then, what does that mean? Because does that mean that parole should be off the table completely for perpetrators of gender-based violence, or as their rights are that after a certain period of time, if they've been a model citizen, that they have changed, become better citizens, they should be allowed out? Because I believe our approach is restorative justice rather than punitive.
Yes, and hence I was saying that's the unfortunate thing with democracy. You cannot take away those, those constitutional promises that have been given to all of us, including perpetrators. But I think there's a way we can manage it, Peter, in such a way that, there is some comfort and some satisfaction from the victim side that the bare minimum has been done. Oscar's sentencing, for me, already was not on par with the crime that was committed. 13 or 15 years, for someone's life is not a sentence that I would consider adequate. At least if we had pushed for 25 years, then we would say he would spend close to 15 years in prison before he can go out. But we already gave him a less sentence, and now, he's fighting to get out. And I don't know what program perpetrators go through in prison for us to have the comfort that when they come out, they're not going to be repeat offenders. I think that's an interrogation that needs to be done in terms of how are we then preparing them for going back into society such that when they are back in society, they're not going to repeat the offense.
The one thing that Mrs. Steenkamp and the family generally is they want the truth of what really happened. And I suppose for any kind of justice, a full confession, a full laying out of what really happened is a start in even considering whether someone should get parole or not.
True. It also gives closure because the questions still remain, and I know that, the story was, we heard it many times, how he thought it was an intruder, but we can see even the gaps in the evidence and all the hard work that went into proving that, in fact, it could have been premeditated murder. That for the family, this is too painful to then not have the truth coming out. At least give them that satisfaction of, we know what really happened, and they can choose whether to forgive or not. But you are also denying them an opportunity to actually know the truth and choose what action they take when the truth is out there. They'll always live with this question mark of, did he tell the truth? Did he lie? Was it premeditated? Was it an accident? At least a confession would have been something that, could have helped them deal better with the loss of their child.
Phinah Kodisang, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the program tonight.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. All right, that's the CEO of the Soul City Institute, Phinah Kodisang, speaking about her concerns when it comes to perpetrators of gender-based violence crimes when it comes to parole. And she's calling for stricter rules and making sure that they serve at least the minimum to make sure that they get the proper justice for the families and the survivors.